you a few minutes to jump on. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Hopefully you enjoyed the message. So we'll give you a few seconds to jump on live. Good afternoon. A few seconds to jump on live. Let me say this. If you are watching this live Q&A from any of my personal Facebook pages, go over and jump on the Tri-Cities Church Facebook page. That way I can make sure that I get all your questions. Last week I missed a few questions because they came on my personal page. And so if you're watching the live Q&A every week during this elevator series, I come on live for about 10 minutes to answer any of your questions about the sermon. And so if you're watching this on my personal page, please go over to the Tri-Cities Church Facebook page. That way I can make sure I get all the questions. I'll try to monitor my page as well, but I can't monitor several pages at one time. So if you're watching this again on my personal page, make sure that you jump over to Tri-Cities Church Facebook page. I'll give a couple of more minutes before I hit the timer. And we'll spend about 10 minutes. If you have any questions or comments about today's message, I'm here to answer those questions. If you have not watched the message, you can go back and watch that on YouTube, Facebook, our website. If you have our mobile app, you can watch it on there as well. If you don't have the mobile app, go to your app store, search Tri-Cities Church. That's TRI-Cities Church. And you can download the mobile app and get notifications about what's going on. All right, let's get to it. I'm going to hit the timer. Let's see if you have any questions, comments about the message. We'll go for about 10 minutes and then we'll wrap it up. All right, let's do it. Any questions that you have about the message that you heard this morning? While those are coming in, let me just sort of frame it in. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, we're doing a series called Elevators, What to Do When Life Pushes Your Buttons. And sort of the reason why we are starting to do this series is because I'm learning that the longer we're in confined spaces with people in close proximity, our buttons tend to be exposed. And so the things that really, really annoy us, or the things that really, really aggravate us or can bring us down, those things are being exposed as we continue to be in close contact with one another. And so over the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about some answers that people gave me as I did sort of an unscientific survey online. What pushes your buttons? Last week, people said, it really pushes my buttons when people ignore me, when I feel dismissed. And then today's message was based on a lot of answers that I got, that people said it really pushes my buttons when people are selfish. And so today's message, we talked about how to handle it when we find ourselves surrounded with people who tend to behave selfishly. We've seen that a lot, especially during this pandemic, because one of the things that psychologists will say is that during a time of crisis, our need for control tends to kick in. And so one of the ways that tends to manifest itself is through selfishness. So we see it with people hoarding supplies. You couldn't get things that you needed during this time because our need for control kicks in during crisis. And we said in the message that, oftentimes we say that character is made in crisis. I think it's also revealed. And so some of the selfishness that we have seen during this crisis was already there. It just got exposed during this time. Even some of us are wrestling with our own tendency to be selfish during this time. So if you watch the message, Any questions, comments, anything that I can answer for you, shoot those over. Go over to Tri-Cities Church Facebook page and shoot me any questions you have. I'm also trying to monitor my personal page as well. But if you have any questions about the message, go ahead and shoot those to me right now. One of the things that I know that I personally have been challenged with, send me your questions, is realizing that there's a streak of selfishness in myself. One of the things I told someone recently is, and you may have had this experience, is that the reason why we get into conflict at all, at its core, is because we all think we're right. Let's be honest. Everybody thinks they're right. And that sort of stems from this ability to control outcomes and situations and control communication. And so one of the things that I know that I'm personally working on that's been revealed during this time is knowing that I tend to think I'm right about everything. And let's be honest, like, it's okay to want to be right. I think that's something that is noble, to want to be right. But it's a whole other thing when your selfishness is sort of shaping that in a way to where you tend to always think you're right. And so, yeah, that's sort of what I've been dealing with. It's a button that I know I can push in other people. And so I'm working really hard on that because I want to be right, but I also have to admit when I am not right, which is not easy. All right, any questions? Got 5 minutes on the clock. Any questions about the message today? Any comments? Anything that I can answer for you about what you heard? Since selfishness is usually viewed by those close, how far should you go to explain that something you have done or bought is self-care, not selfishness? That's a good question. I think there has to be a limit to which you feel like you have to justify self-care. And so decide up front that there's only so much explaining that I have to do. Usually people who, and this has been my experience, usually people who have a problem with or want you to justify taking care of yourself don't want you to do so because they feel like that time, money, or energy could be spent in doing something for them. And so let's be honest, those types of people usually cannot be reasoned with. I had a good friend tell me that when you try to reason with unreasonable people or people who are being unreasonable in the moment, you yourself become unreasonable. And so I think, you can have a conversation with them, especially if you're close, maybe give them some insight into what you've been dealing with. Oftentimes I think people tend to perceive that we're stronger than what we really are. And so when they see us taking some time to ourselves, it kind of is sort of a shock to them. And so let's take another question. I think to answer that question, just know how far you want to go with that, understanding that you're probably talking to somebody who wants you to spend that time, energy, and resources on yourself. And so you may not be able to really, really deal with that situation when you're talking to someone who's selfish. Here's another question. Is there a time you have had to set a boundary on a relationship with a selfish individual and experience negative consequences? How do you handle that personally? Yeah, I think we're all going to run into that. Good question. Where you have to set boundaries. Here's what I say about boundaries. I think we've been taught, and it's a big thing now, to to talk about boundaries. Nobody teaches us how to build boundaries with bridges. And so I think boundaries are important, but sometimes we set up so many boundaries that people don't know the appropriate way to access us. And so let me start there by saying set boundaries, but set boundaries that have bridges. So if you think about a castle, an old school castle that had a moat around it, and there was an appropriate way to access the castle. There's an appropriate way to access the facility. People need to know what the appropriate way is to access your energy, your time, your space, your resources. And then once they know that and they don't abide by that, then you can absolutely be okay with not having to entertain some of the things that come along with that, if we want to call them consequences. Because if I've given you the appropriate way to access, so for example, a lot of people who know me know I'll tell you, I'll give you my number, text me first to let me know that you want to talk and what time is good for you. And that's in a boundary that I've set up, but I've also built a bridge. So in the circumstances where you need to access me, I'm giving you the appropriate way to access me. If you go around that and you sort of try to broach those boundaries without that, then I'm willing to pay the quote unquote consequences of whatever that person wants to deal with, because I have given them the appropriate way to access my time, space, and energy. Outside of that, I will not hold myself accountable for how they respond. And you also have to understand that if you're dealing with a selfish person, a lot of times they don't want advice, they just want attention. And so feeding into that negative energy only continues to give them what they want anyway, which is all your time, energy, space. And so just be mindful of that if you don't have it to give, you don't have it to give. And don't even give it on the back end by entertaining how they respond to you setting up boundaries. But I would say set up boundaries with bridges so people know the appropriate way to access your time, space, and energy. Good questions. Good questions. Any other questions? We got a few more. I'll go for a little bit longer. Great questions. I think maybe at some point, I don't know, when we get back together, maybe I'll do a class or something. I've actually taught this at conferences. And I'm actually, in the next 2 weeks, I have to do a webinar series for organization. And I'll be talking about that as well. Some of that talk that I give is about how to build boundaries with bridges. Never set up boundaries that no one knows how to access you. It's okay to have boundaries, but if they don't know how to access you, you're going to end up in more conflict than necessary, because they're going to try every way. I tell people all the time, I give the image again of the castle with the moat. There's a bridge. Here's the bridge. This is how you get to me. Be careful of people who show up in your life soaking wet, because those are the people who don't respect the bridges. They might know you have boundaries, but they won't respect the bridge that you've built for them to be able to access you. So be careful of that. Any more questions? I'm monitoring here. We'll go for another minute or so. Great questions. All right, good people. Looks like we've got most of the questions in. I'll wait a couple of more seconds to see if we get any other questions in. Again, if you have not seen the message, then I encourage you to go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. The message is also on my personal page. If you don't have our app, go to your app store, search Tri-Cities Church. That's TRI-cities. Download that, listen to the message. And then if you have any questions after that, as we talked about selfishness and dealing with selfish people and people who push your